Aaron had always told me grief was like a tide, that it would come and go, pulling at the edges of your life until you learned how to breathe through the undertow. But 3 months after his funeral, I had stopped believing in tides altogether. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that made your thoughts louder, sharper, crueler. I started walking through the rooms at night with no lights on, just letting the dark press against me, trying to feel something that wasn't absence. That was when I found the first entry. It was late, well past midnight, and I had been cleaning out the drawers in the study because I couldn't stand the smell of Aaron's cologne lingering in the wood. A notebook slid from the back of the desk, an old leather-bound thing I didn't recognize. I thought it might be one of Aaron's sketchbooks. He had been meticulous about keeping everything. But when I opened it, the handwriting wasn't his. The ink was faded, but the words were sharp enough to slice through me. I am writing this so she won't forget what she saw. She will deny it at first. She always does. I froze, the words sinking in, my breath caught between a laugh and a sob. It didn't make sense. Who was she? And why did it feel like the notebook was waiting for me to find it? I read on, flipping through pages filled with careful, looping script. The widow walks her halls at night. She does not turn on the lights. She thinks she is searching for something, but it is already searching for her. My fingers tightened on the journal, and I glanced around the study as if I might catch someone standing there, smiling at their cruel little prank. But there was only the stillness, the creak of the old house settling. I should have stopped reading then, but I couldn't. Each line felt like it was speaking directly to me. She will find this when the tide is lowest. She will feel watched. She will think it is grief. But it isn't. The tide. Aaron's metaphor. I felt the blood drain from my face. I shut the book, hard, and sat there in the dark, pressing my palms to the cover as if I could smother it. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe Aaron had written it as a kind of private riddle, though the handwriting wasn't his. Maybe one of his colleagues left it behind. He had been a historian, often borrowing old texts from archives. But deep down, in the part of me I didn't let speak since the funeral, I knew this wasn't his. And it wasn't chance. The next morning I left the journal on the desk, determined to forget it. I told myself I was exhausted, that I'd misread it, that grief was making me paranoid. But when I came back that night, the book was open, lying flat, a fresh page waiting. The words at the top were new. Do not try to close me again. I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk with the journal and demanded answers out loud, like an insane woman talking to herself. But the book didn't move, didn't bleed ink in front of my eyes. Still, I couldn't shake the certainty that whoever wrote this had been writing for me, and that they weren't finished. I thought about calling my sister, but she would only tell me to see a therapist. I thought about burning the book, but the image of fire licking across its pages made me recoil, as if destroying it would somehow make it more real. On the third night, the journal told me a secret I had never shared with anyone. She remembers the night she pretended to sleep, the way his breathing changed, the way the phone glowed in his hand when he thought she wasn't looking. My chest seized. I could see it, the exact moment 2 years ago when Aaron had sat at the edge of the bed, phone angled away from me. I had convinced myself I was imagining things, had never confronted him. But the journal knew. My throat closed as I whispered, "Who are you?" The reply came scrawled beneath my question, appearing in the space I had left. "I am what is left when he is gone." My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. I wanted to scream, to rip the pages out, to run. Instead, I sat there, transfixed, because as much as it terrified me, a darker truth curled inside my chest. I wanted to know what it would tell me next. The entries grew sharper, more intimate, as if the writer had lived inside our walls, watching, cataloging every fracture in our marriage, every hesitation in my voice, every silence we left between us. He loved you, but not always. He stayed, but not willingly. He lied, but not enough to leave. Each line carved into me like confession and accusation at once. I stopped eating, stopped answering calls, unable to leave the book alone. It was consuming me, and yet I couldn't let go. Then, on the 6th night, the entry changed. She thinks this is memory. It is not. It is warning. What she lost will return, but not as she expects. My breath caught, my skin prickling. Return? I read the sentence again and again until the words blurred. Was it promising me Aaron's ghost, some cruel resurrection? Or something worse, something wearing his shape but not his soul? My heart pounded as I turned the page, desperate for clarity, and froze. The next sheet was not covered in handwriting, but in a photograph, glued roughly to the paper. My hand trembled as I traced the edges. It was me, standing in the hallway of our home. The timestamp in the corner marked it as 2 nights ago, while I had been wandering the dark, trying to outpace my grief. But I hadn't taken it, and Aaron was dead. That was when the lights flickered, and I heard the sound of a door unlocking somewhere in the house. The sound of the lock turning was soft, almost apologetic, as if the house itself was embarrassed by the intrusion, but it sliced through me with the weight of a gunshot. I froze, the photograph still trembling in my hand, my eyes fixed on the dark hallway beyond the study door. For one awful second, I thought I saw movement there, a shadow leaning too far into the light. My body acted before my mind did. I slammed the journal shut, clutching it like a shield, and stumbled back against the desk. Aaron. The name tore out of me before I could stop it. Shame and desperation tangled in my voice. The silence that followed was merciless. I forced myself into the hall, bare feet on the cold wood, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out every other sound. The air felt wrong, too heavy, like I had stepped into a room just after someone exhaled. I moved through each space, flicking lights on, opening closets, pressing my palm against the front door, which was still locked from the inside. No intruder, no shadow, no Aaron. And yet, the certainty of being watched clung to me like a second skin. When I returned to the study, the journal was open again, the photograph gone. My throat tightened. I searched the floor, the desk, even the wastebasket, but it had vanished as if it had never been there. Instead, a new line stretched across the page in sharp, slanted ink. He will knock before he enters. Do not answer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright on the couch with every lamp blazing, staring at the door until the dawn seeped through the curtains. I told myself I was losing my mind, that grief was eating me alive and manifesting in hallucinations. But in the raw light of morning, the words in the journal looked exactly the same as they had hours ago, steady and unshaken, proof etched in ink. Over the next days, the house seemed to conspire against me. Doors creaked open when I turned my back. Lights flickered even when I replaced the bulbs. Once, I woke to find every mirror in the house veiled with condensation though I hadn't showered, as if someone had stood before them, breathing. And always, the journal waited. I tried locking it away, burying it under clothes, sealing it in a box in the attic, but it never stayed hidden. Each night I returned to the study to find it resting on the desk, open to a fresh page. The entries grew bolder, describing not only my nights but my thoughts, my doubts, the moments I hated myself for. She wonders if she should have confronted him that night. She fears the answer more than the truth. She knows she would have stayed, even if he confessed. My stomach curdled every time I read those lines, because they weren't wrong. The journal wasn't taunting me. It was stripping me bare, reducing me to the woman I had always hidden from myself. And yet, buried among the accusations were fragments of something stranger, darker. The widow is not alone in her house. She is never alone. She feels him in the corners, in the pause between heartbeats. She should not call it grief. I started drinking wine just to steady my nerves, my days blurring into nights. My sister left voicemails I ignored, her voice full of worry I couldn't face. How could I explain that my dead husband's house was writing me warnings? That the man I buried might still be knocking on doors I wasn't supposed to open? On the 7th night, the journal gave me instructions. If she wants to know, she must go where the garden ends. She must dig where the roots cross. She will find what he left behind. I sat on the edge of the bed, the words burning in my skull. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, to lock the house and run, but curiosity is its own poison. By midnight, I was in the garden, shovel in hand, breath steaming in the cold. The earth resisted, hard and frozen, but eventually I found the place the journal described. 2 gnarled roots twisting together like clasped hands. My shovel struck something hollow. My pulse surged. I dropped to my knees, clawing dirt away until a wooden box emerged, swollen with damp. My hands shook as I pried it open. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. All of me. Sleeping, cooking, crying at the kitchen table, standing in the garden. Every moment private, unguarded. Some were years old, my hair longer, my clothes different. Others were recent, days recent. The most recent was from that morning, me staring at my untouched breakfast, head bowed. I dropped the box, while rising in my throat, my skin crawling with the certainty that I was being watched even as I crouched there in the dirt. I stumbled inside, my fingers smeared with soil, and the journal was waiting on the kitchen counter, though I had left it in the study. A single new line sprawled across the page. Now she knows why he never left her. I wanted to scream, to hurl the book into the fire, to burn every photograph, but my knees buckled under me, and I sank to the floor instead, clutching my stomach as sobs tore through me. It was impossible. Aaron couldn't have taken these pictures. He couldn't have hidden them. He was dead. But the proof sat in front of me, undeniable, and the part of me that had always wondered about that glowing phone, about his late nights, about the secrets he carried. I couldn't silence it anymore. And then the knock came. A single, sharp rap at the front door, echoing through the house like a command. My blood ran cold, the journal slipping from my fingers. Another knock followed, steady, deliberate. My breath came in shallow gasps. The journal's warning screamed through my head. He will knock before he enters. Do not answer. But what if it was Aaron? What if everything I thought I buried had found a way back? My hand crept toward the door handle, trembling, the space between each knock stretching like eternity, until finally I pressed my palm against the cold metal. The rain had not stopped since that night I first opened Henry's journal, and though I told myself it was coincidence, part of me believed the world itself had taken on the grief I carried. The days blurred together, endless cycles of damp mornings and long evenings by the fire where I read his words aloud, hearing his voice in my head until it nearly drove me to madness. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon when I thought I might finally be losing my grip, someone knocked at the door. The sound startled me so badly that I nearly dropped the journal into the fire. No one ever visited anymore. The neighbors avoided me, my family had grown tired of my isolation, and the church ladies had long since given up trying to pull me back into their gossiping circles. The knock came again, firm, deliberate. I opened the door, heart racing, and found a man standing on the porch. He was middle-aged, his hair graying at the temples, his clothes soaked through from the rain. He removed his hat, his expression respectful but heavy. "Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, his voice low. I stiffened. Hardly anyone used that name anymore. "Yes," I said cautiously. He shifted, producing a leather satchel from beneath his coat. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Or at least, to both of us." My eyes dropped to the satchel, then back to his face. "I don't know what you mean." He sighed, almost weary. "Henry's journal." He meant for it to reach more than one person. I was a friend. At first the word stung, because Henry had never spoken of this man, and the idea of some secret friendship, some confidant I had been excluded from, twisted my gut with equal parts anger and betrayal. But the man didn't look like someone peddling lies. His eyes were sincere, lined not just from age but from sorrow. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He removed his coat, dripping water on the floor, and sat near the fire as if he had been here before. I clutched the journal tightly, unwilling to let it out of my grasp. "You said you knew my husband," I began, my voice trembling between accusation and curiosity. He nodded. "We met long before you, and he married. In the war. He and we saw things. Things that changed us. He never spoke of them to you?" I shook my head, though my hands shook. He never said a word. He kept everything to himself. The man's gaze softened, as though that confirmed something he had long suspected. Henry wasn't just writing for himself. He was leaving a map, a record of what happened to us, of what we carried. And he wanted you to know, even if it destroyed the life you thought you had. My pulse quickened, and I hated him for putting it that way, for suggesting Henry had intended me to be undone by these pages. But still, I asked, "What kind of things?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the rain outside might overhear. "During the war, we stumbled into something that wasn't meant for us. A building, abandoned, or at least it seemed. But inside were journals, dozens of them, written in different hands, some in languages neither of us knew. And they all told of lives, strange, twisted lives, that mirrored ours too closely to be coincidence." My throat tightened. "You mean, like ours? As if someone was writing about us?" He nodded slowly. "At first we thought it was madness, a cruel trick. But some of those journals spoke of futures, of outcomes we hadn't yet lived. Henry feared them, But he couldn't stay away. He kept one, just one, though it cursed him to the end. The words rang in my head, making Henry's endless scribblings suddenly heavier with meaning. The man pulled a notebook from his satchel, battered and water-stained. This was mine. He told me you might need it, someday, that it would make sense when the time was right. He slid it across the table. I hesitated, staring at the book as though it might bite. My hand hovered, trembling, before I finally touched it. The leather was rough, the pages swollen from moisture. I opened it carefully, and my breath caught. On the first page was a drawing of my house. Not as it was now, but as it had looked years ago, with the garden Henry planted still blooming, the porch freshly painted, the windows bright with light. My heart pounded so hard I nearly slammed it shut. How could you have this? I whispered. He shook his head. We never understood. The journals seemed to appear from nowhere, as if left behind by other hands, other lives. But Henry believed they were warnings. I thought of the strange passages I had already read in his journal, the references to choices he never made, moments that had never happened, yet felt eerily possible. My hands shook so badly I pressed them against my knees. Why tell me now? I asked. He looked into the fire, his expression grim. Because the journals aren't just memories. They're invitations. And once you start reading them, truly reading them, you can't escape what they demand. His words made the room feel suddenly smaller, the fire too hot against my face. I remembered the sensation from nights before, the way the words had seemed to breathe, the way I felt tugged into some invisible current. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice almost breaking. He finally looked back at me, eyes hollow but steady. You have to decide if Henry wanted you to finish what he couldn't, or to burn it all before it swallows you too. The words lingered, suffocating. My grip tightened on the two journals, Henry's and this stranger's, as if they might anchor me in place. But deep down, I knew they were pulling me somewhere else entirely. The days blurred together after that, and I began to lose the distinction between the words I was writing and the world outside the window. The journal lay on the desk with its cracked spine, but its pages no longer waited blank for me to fill them. Instead, I sometimes found words already there, phrases that I was sure I had not written, sentences curling like smoke across the paper. At first I told myself it was exhaustion, that in my grief I had written and forgotten, but as the nights grew longer and the shadows in the house seemed to linger even after the lamps were lit, I stopped pretending. The journal was speaking back. It began with small intrusions. A line in my husband's familiar hand, as if he had leaned over my shoulder and whispered to me through ink. I am not gone, one read, and I pressed my trembling fingers against it, hearing his voice echo in my mind. Another time it was a single word, wait. But then the entries grew longer, more detailed, describing places I did not know, conversations I had never had, versions of my life I could not remember. One entry spoke of us having children, of a boy with dark hair and restless energy, and a girl who loved to sit by the fire reading, just as I once had. I stared at those words until my eyes burned, until I almost believed I could hear their laughter in the hall. Yet when I reached for memory, there was only emptiness. I carried the journal into bed with me, clutching it like it could anchor me, but the dreams it carried were no gentler. I dreamt of rooms in the house that no longer existed, corridors that twisted upon themselves, windows opening onto landscapes that were not mine. In one dream, I followed the sound of my husband's voice down into the cellar, only to find the journal waiting there on the floor, open to a page filled entirely with my name, written over and over until the letters bled into each other like veins. When I woke, the page was still there. That was the moment I realized I could not keep this secret contained. My sister arrived unannounced one afternoon, her voice sharp with concern as she stepped inside and looked around the neglected rooms. She saw the dishes unwashed, the curtains drawn, the dust gathering in corners I no longer noticed. She saw me too, hollow-eyed, clutching the journal to my chest like a child clings to a doll. You need help, she said, her voice trembling between anger and pity. This isn't what he would have wanted. I told her to leave, my words cutting deeper than I intended, but she didn't move. Instead, she tried to take the journal from me, and in that instant something inside me snapped. I pulled back with such force that I nearly fell, my voice breaking as I shouted, "Don't touch it. You don't understand. He's still here." The silence that followed was unbearable. Her eyes filled with tears, but not for me, for the sister she believed she had lost. Without another word, she left. The door shut hard enough to rattle the glass, and the house settled into a silence so heavy it felt like punishment. That night, the journal punished me further. Its pages no longer carried glimpses of love or echoes of lives that might have been. Instead, they filled with accusations. Words scrawled in a hand I could not recognize. You let him die. You wanted this. You are nothing without me. I tried to tear the pages free, but as soon as I ripped one out, another appeared in its place, blank for a moment before words bled across it like fresh wounds. My hands shook so violently I could hardly close the cover, and when I looked up I thought I saw someone standing in the doorway, a tall figure, blurred by shadow. My husband's shape, my husband's stance. I called his name, but the figure did not answer. It only stood there until the shadows swallowed it whole. I stopped eating. I stopped leaving the house. Every sound became suspicious. Every creak of the floorboards another sign that the journal had spilled beyond its pages into the walls themselves. Sometimes, when the lamps flickered, I swore I heard whispers rising through the vents, voices chanting fragments of my own words back at me. Once, in the dead of night, I awoke to find the journal no longer on my desk, but at the foot of my bed, lying open as though it had walked there itself. The entry that night described me, in detail, as I lay sleeping. The words ended with, "She will not wake again." But I had woken. I slammed the book shut and threw it into the wardrobe, burying it under clothes and blankets. But even with the doors closed I could hear it, a low thrum like a heart beating through the wood. The house itself seemed to respond, its walls bending inward, its windows showing skies that twisted with unfamiliar stars. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the kitchen window and saw not my garden but a road I did not recognize, lit by street lamps taller and stranger than any in our town. A man walked past, and for a moment I thought it was my husband again, alive, unharmed, his step brisk as though he had never known death. I pounded the glass, shouting his name, but he did not turn. He vanished into the dark as if he had never been there at all. That was when I realized the collapse had already begun. The journal was no longer content to show me other lives. It was pulling me toward them, unraveling the fragile barrier between what was mine and what was not. My hands shook as I reached for it again, tearing open the wardrobe, dragging it free. The cover was hot against my palms, the air in the room vibrating with a hum that made my teeth ache. I opened it, desperate to understand, to find some command that might reverse what was happening. But the page stared back at me with a single sentence. Choose now. Choose what? Between life and death? Between reality and illusion? Between the man I had lost and the world that no longer felt like mine? I pressed my hand to the page, hoping for an answer, and for the first time, the ink bled into my skin. It burned, sharp and immediate, carving the words into my palm. I screamed, but the sound dissolved into silence, as if the house itself swallowed it whole. The lights went out, the hum deepened, and when I lifted my hand away, the words on the page had changed to a command that froze the blood in my veins. Bring him back. I do not remember deciding to obey, only that the command burned in my hand long after the ink had vanished from the page. Bring him back. It echoed through me with the force of a vow, and suddenly everything I did was in service to it. I lit candles in every room, their flames trembling as though uncertain, and I placed the journal in the center of the dining table like an idol. The house itself seemed to lean closer as I did, the walls groaning, the floorboards sighing. I opened the journal and waited, certain it would tell me what to do next. And it did. The pages filled slowly, as though written by an invisible hand, detailing rituals I had never known, names of herbs I had never planted, instructions that made no sense until I found myself obeying them without hesitation. I scoured the cupboards for salt, arranged it in circles on the floor, gathered locks of my own hair, drops of blood from my thumb, photographs of us together, now curling at the edges. The journal demanded them all, and I gave them freely, because nothing mattered except that final promise. He would return. But as I worked, I felt the cost press in. Shadows thickened in the corners, shapes bent in ways no human body should, flickering just beyond sight. The hum returned, deeper than ever, rattling the glass in the windows, shaking dust from the ceiling. And through it all, I heard his voice, faint, calling my name, not from the grave but from somewhere else, somewhere close enough to touch, if only I followed. I set the journal in my lap, trembling. "Tell me," I whispered. "Tell me what to do." The ink shifted. One line appeared. "Open the door." I looked toward the hallway, toward the cellar door I had avoided since his death. My chest tightened, but my feet carried me forward as though I had no choice. Each step down the creaking staircase echoed too loudly, as if the house were hollow, as if I was descending into the ribs of something alive. The air grew cold and wet, the smell of earth heavy in my throat. At the bottom, the journal snapped open of its own accord, its pages fluttering until they stilled on a drawing. A door sketched in harsh lines, light spilling out from behind it. I raised my eyes. The cellar wall had split. A thin crack of pale light glowed where bricks should have been, widening even as I watched, as if answering the command. My heart pounded, torn between terror and longing, and when I pressed my fingers to the light, it was warm, pulsing like skin. "Is it you?" I whispered, and the light pulsed in reply. I pushed harder, and the wall gave way, crumbling inward until the crack became a doorway, and beyond it, nothing I recognized. A corridor stretched before me, endless and shifting, its walls covered in the same handwriting that filled the journal, scrawled in black across every surface. Some words I knew. Others belonged to languages that hurt to look at. My husband's voice grew louder here, urgent, closer. I ran. The journal clutched to my chest, its weight dragging at me, and the words on the walls seemed to move, shifting as I passed, guiding me deeper. I turned corners that should not have existed, descended stairs that seemed to spiral forever, until finally I entered a chamber where the air vibrated like a plucked string. At its center stood a figure. Not quite him, not quite human. His outline was familiar. The slope of his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly to one side as though listening, but his face was blurred, like paint smeared across glass. My knees weakened. "It's you," I whispered. The figure reached out, and though his hand was wrong, too long, too thin, I felt the warmth of him, the memory of his touch, and I collapsed into sobs. The journal shook in my grip, opening again to a final instruction. "Give him your breath." I froze. I understood at once. This was the cost. He could return, but only if I yielded what kept me tethered here. My lungs tightened as though already preparing to give. The figure's distorted face leaned close, and his voice filled my head, perfectly his. No hesitation, no distortion. "Please," he said. "I've been waiting." My heart screamed yes. Every part of me that had lived in emptiness since his death begged for me to say yes. I raised the journal higher, my hand trembling over the page, and the chamber seemed to close in, shadows pressing forward, the humming rising to a roar. "If I give this," I whispered, "what will remain of me?" The figure's face flickered. For an instant I thought I saw not love, but hunger there, an endless need. My husband's voice softened. "What else do you have left?" My breath hitched. He was right. What else had I? My sister had turned away. My life outside this obsession was already ash. The only thing I had left to offer was myself. The journal's ink bled into new words across the page, sealing the moment. Now or never. The chamber shook violently, dust and stone raining down, the walls trembling as if the choice itself was tearing this place apart. I pressed my lips against his, felt the heat of him, the wrongness and the familiarity mingled together, and drew in what might have been his first breath in years. And then the air seared my throat as I exhaled, and for a moment I thought I was dying, thought the chamber had claimed me in its vibrating darkness, but then I realized the sound filling the space was not my breath, but his. He gasped, ragged, desperate, and utterly alive. The blurred edges of his face sharpened, the smears of shadow pulling inward until they became eyes I had memorized long ago, lips I had kissed 1,000 times, lines etched by laughter and sorrow. He was whole. He was here. I fell to my knees, sobbing in relief, clutching at him as though he might vanish again, but his arms wrapped around me with a warmth I had thought forever lost. For a moment, I believed the journal had kept its promise without cruelty, that love had finally conquered every distance, every silence. But then his breath hitched again, this time wrong, too deep, too greedy. His grip tightened until my bones ached, and when I tried to pull back, his eyes glowed faintly with the same pale light I had seen in the crack of the wall. "It worked," he murmured, but his voice was layered now, not only his, dozens beneath it, speaking through him, all hungry, all claiming. Terror crawled up my spine. "It's you," I whispered, "but it's not only you." The journal slipped from my fingers and landed open on the floor, its pages fluttering wildly as though caught in a wind that wasn't there. The words shifted too fast to read, bleeding into one another, until only a single phrase remained clear. The vessel must feed. My husband, or the thing wearing him, smiled with a tenderness that broke my heart even as his teeth sharpened into something not human. "You gave me your breath," he said, "but breath is not enough." The chamber walls groaned, the scrawled words on them dripping like wet paint, running together into rivers of black. Shadows seeped forward, pressing at my heels, and every instinct screamed at me to flee, but love chained me in place. "I can't lose you again," I whispered, tears burning hot. He stepped closer, his outline flickering between the man I had loved and the thing that had waited in the dark. "Then don't," he said. "Stay. Become part of me. We can be together, always." My lungs constricted, not from lack of air, but from the unbearable weight of choice. To refuse meant losing him forever, maybe losing myself to whatever punishment the journal still had waiting. To accept meant surrendering what little remained of who I was, dissolving into something that might not even remember me when it was finished. The journal screamed in my head, though no sound came from its pages. I staggered backward, my heel striking the book, and suddenly images filled me. Dozens of women, dozens of faces, each clutching the same journal in different rooms, in different times, their stories ending here, in this chamber, all of them opening the door, all of them bringing something back, none of them leaving. My chest collapsed with the weight of it. I was not chosen. I was repeating. A ritual. A cycle. The journal had never belonged to me. It owned me. My husband's hands touched my face, soft again, familiar again, and he leaned close enough that I could smell him. The soap he had used, the trace of coffee on his breath, details too perfect to be invention. "Choose," he whispered. "Now." My heart splintered. "If I go with you," I asked, "will you promise to remember me?" His eyes flickered, not with recognition, but with hunger, and I knew the answer before he spoke. "I promise you'll never be forgotten." It was not the same thing. The chamber cracked, beams of light slicing through the walls, the whole place tearing apart under the weight of the decision. I bent, scooped the journal from the ground, and held it against my chest. Its pages burned like fire, demanding one final offering. I could let it end here. I could give myself, or I could break the cycle. My hands shook as I tore at the spine, ripping the journal apart, scattering pages into the collapsing air. The chamber screamed, my husband screamed, shadows convulsed as though burned, and the light swallowed everything. And then, silence. I woke on the cellar floor, dust choking my lungs, the journal nothing but ash around me. The wall was whole again, the crack of light gone. Upstairs, the house was empty. No warmth, no trace of him, no voice calling my name. Only me, breathing still, but hollowed out, my chest aching with absence. Days blurred. Weeks. I wandered through the rooms with nothing to hold except fragments of memory, unsure if I had saved myself or condemned him, unsure if I had destroyed a monster or abandoned the only piece of him left. At night, I swore I heard him whisper, not from the cellar, but from the hollow inside me where my breath had gone. And sometimes, in dreams, I saw a journal lying whole again on my bedside table, its cover clean, its pages blank, waiting for me to open it and begin. I never touched it. But every morning, the ash on the floor was gone.